Hello, everyone. My name is Imaan Mirza, and I'm the manager of Heritage Week. I am more than pleased to have everyone who's joined us here today. This week marks the celebration of Pakistan Independence Day, which is also today. In addition to this, we are using this week to celebrate APF's 15th year anniversary. So a round of applause to all those who have kept APF running for the past 15 years. And we also look forward to the bright future ahead. And I don't want to sway any longer, so let's dive right into today's event, Pakistani American Literature. We have a wonderful host today, Imaan, an amazing name. Imaan Mirza is a rising senior at Harvard College studying history and literature with academic interests in Pakistan, Islamic family laws, American constitutional history, and women's rights. She grew up in Jeddah, Cairo, and Lahore, and now calls Indiana home. In her free time, she enjoys writing nonfiction for a literary magazine and developing social and political programming for cultural groups at Harvard. So welcome. And we have an amazing guest speaker here today. Dr. Waqar Azeem teaches English literature at Binghamton University. He researches and writes about postcolonial literature, ethnic studies, human rights, and critical theory. He's an alumnus of Fulbright Exchange Program and promotes interracial understanding and peace. Thank you both so much for being here today, and we're more than excited to get started. Professor Azeem, take it away.
Thank you so much. Let me right away share the slides, and then I would be starting by first thanking a few people who have been very supportive, starting obviously with Henry, who responded to my kind of request for a conversation about Pakistani American literature, and then it developed into what seems to be a wonderful event today. Dr. Nasser Qureshi, I had a pleasure to have a conversation with him. Again, very supportive. Iman Zahir, who is moderating the program today. And then thanks to Imaan Mirza, with whom I have had extensive conversations about Pakistani American literature and its various contours. Thanks also to the whole APF team, all the people who worked for the brochure, the flyer, put together the program, created the invitation, and all kind of logistics required to make this event possible. Thanks also finally to the audience without whom this event will not be possible. So let's go through the slides in next 20 minutes. I would be briefing you all about Pakistani American literature briefly, and then we would start with some question-answer exchange. So I'll be putting it to presentation mode so you can have a better view. So this picture is in fact a kind of stall that we put together at American Civic Association in Binghamton. So it beautifully represents Pakistani culture over here. And if you keep the context in mind, which is American Civic Association, that kind of tells us a lot about the possibility of Pakistani American culture working together, in a kind of architectural context of the, official site of American Civic Association. So the objective today is very basic, which is to engage the audience in conversation about Pakistani American literature. So let's move on from there to a basic introduction of what constitutes Pakistani American literature. So a broad definition would be it's an imaginative and fictional representation of the experiences, desires, anxieties, emotions, and the holistic life of Pakistani immigrants and their descendants to the United States. So when I say imaginative and fictional representation, by that I mean novel, drama, poetry, in some cases, essays as well. So the disciplinary roots of Pakistani American literature can be traced in various ways, but two more common ways are to contextualize Pakistani American literature in the broader body of what we call South Asian American literature, which is the literature about the South Asian diaspora, which is diaspora from various countries of South Asia in the United States. So the literature that represents their concerns, their life in the United States would be South Asian American literature, and Pakistani literature would be one offshoot out of that. This is immediate context. The broader context would be diaspora literature. We can also name that as immigration literature, or in some cases, post-colonial literature. In some cases also as ethnic literature. So diaspora, post-colonial, ethnic, immigration literature, they are various names for the literature which represents the lives of various diasporas in the United States. So the examples would be African American, Latinx, and other Asian American, like Chinese American, Japanese American, or Vietnamese American diaspora in the US. So Pakistani American literature can be traced back to this broader and very rich body of literature, which is kind of thriving both in the United States and beyond. So specifically, Pakistani literature represent Pakistani culture, Islamic faith, American society, and it complicates for us themes related to immigration, identity, and sense of belonging to American culture or to the culture of the country which we come from, that is Pakistan. So from this basic introduction, I'm moving on to some of the major authors and their works. So there is a specific rationale behind the choice of the writers and their works I'm picking on right now, which is the writers I'm just going to introduce to you. They are Pakistani American writers, either in the sense that they were born in Pakistan and then they either grew up or worked in the United States, or in another sense, which is they are born in Pakistan and they care about Pakistani diaspora. So they wrote about Pakistani diaspora. So the first writer, which is considered to be one of the very initial writers about Pakistani diaspora, is Babsi Sidhwa. There are some writings which predate Babsi Sidhwa as well. But because of the specific focus of her at least one book about Pakistani American literature, I'm going to start my discussion from Sidhwa. So she was born in Karachi, then grew up in Lahore. She graduated from Kinnaird College, currently lives in Texas. She wrote various novels, which include The Crow Eaters, and then Cracking India, which was later turned into a film as well, titled Earth, by the director Deepa Mehta, and then another novel called Water. So her one work which stands out because of its focus on Pakistani diaspora is An American Brat, which is about Feroza Kinwala, a young girl who immigrates to the US. So she is living in a particular politically charged context of Pakistani history. So that is the time when Zia's period ends, Bhutto's period ends, and then Zia's period starts. So there is a concern among the family about Feroza's brought up. So her mother decides to send her to the United States, where she spends her time with her uncle, whose name is Manik, and eventually she decides to study in the United States at Idaho, and then graduates, and then develops her life in the United States. She also develops relationships and then has some of the intergenerational conflicts with her mom, but then she presses on with her own will and kind of decides to live her life in her own way, but then learns various lessons, and is able to achieve some kind of assimilation in the United States after a few compromises. After Sidwa, the next writer is Wajahat Ali, who was born in Bay Area, California, but his parents were Pakistani immigrants, so that is his connection. He wrote books like Go Back to Where You Came From and The Domestic Crusaders. Wajahat Ali, as a writer, he expands the narrative of what we call Americanness. So he talks about inclusivity, diversity, togetherness of various ethnicities. So the book that I pick up here is The Domestic Crusaders, which is a play. It's about basically three families coming together on the stage and discussing with each other various concerns which surround them. Among the concerns are their sense of division between what their culture offers to them, what their Pakistani culture offers to them, and what is out there in the form of American culture. So they are trying to navigate the sharp line between these two cultures, and they're trying to push through their self and their identity in a very positive and constructive manner. The next author we have is Shala Abdullah. She's a contemporary Pakistani American writer. She wrote Beyond the Kind Wall, which is short stories, a collection of stories. But then she also wrote another book called Saffron Dreams. So Saffron Dreams is once again a novel about Arisa Ilahi, who marries to Faizan, moves to New York City, and then in an unfortunate turn of events, she loses her husband in unfortunate 9/11 attacks. So she manages her life after the loss of her husband in a manner where she has to face many confusions which surround a Muslim woman's life post 9/11. She resurrects her identity, comes to terms with slightly changed American reality. She also reclaims her belief in American dream, eventually turns into a successful writer, and then decides to live in the United States. Our next writer is Ayad Akhtar, who was born in Staten Island, New York, to Pakistani parents. He also won a Pulitzer Prize for drama and numerous other awards. Mostly he represents Muslim American experience in many of his works. These are his famous works: 2 novels, American Dervish and Homeland Elegies, and 2 plays, Disgraced and Junk. So one particular book I would refer to is American Dervish. So this novel is, as opposed to the previous 3 books I referred to, is about a young boy. So it's kind of representation of a young boy's perspectives on American culture while he's trying to live his Pakistani reality. So he has both those legacies carrying together. One is coming through his parents of his Pakistani identity, and the other one he's adopting in the form of American culture, coming to him through his circle of friends, through classroom, through the university he goes to, so on and so forth. So eventually he is able to strike some balance between his faith and freedom. So, a story full of twists. Uh, the story is also specifically about experiences of a woman as she navigates a kind of narrow passage or troubled passage between a troubled, line between uh, her faith and the secular culture, American secular culture. Um, so towards the end of the novel, we find her as a more complex character who has got to understand her life in a more holistic manner. And then we have Mohsin Hamid, who I would say is probably more well known compared with the other writers I just mentioned, at least in the context of the United States academia. His famous novels are Moth Smoke, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia, Exit West, and The Last White Man. So The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which also was later screened as a film as well, is about Changes, who is a Princeton graduate, lands a very good job, continues to work for some time, but then at a particular point in time, decides to return to Pakistan. That is where he came from. So as the story begins, we see he already has made his move, which is living in Lahore, teaching in a private university. And then he comes across an American who is not named in the whole book, has conversation with him, engages in a kind of dialogue with him, sitting in famous Anarkali food street, at a restaurant, drinking tea, eating food, and then engaging in that conversation, which shows to us Changes, the protagonist in the novel, as the only interlocutor, so the only one speaking, while the audience, the other person, stays quiet all the time. So in a way, it is a kind of twist over who is speaking, and therefore an empowerment which is associated with the character of Changes. So out of these 5 works, these are not all, this is not all Pakistani American literature, but this sampling that I just picked on, some of the themes which stand out and which we can discuss further are like this. So I try to kind of make a division somewhere. I'll mention that shortly. And the division is somewhere along the lines of periodicity, so the time period. So we would see in more classical sense some of the themes which show up, for example, in works like Babsi Sidhwa, assimilation, the growth of love and relationship among Pakistani diaspora in the US, this concept of coming of age or personal growth or independence of men and women, coming from Pakistani diaspora, then intergenerational conflict, they play out a lot. Immigration and the immigrant experience in very official form, where characters are shown to be in conflict with the immigration policies, then question of identity, how the characters think about themselves as either Pakistani or American or both at the same time, and then finally the question of American dream. So how the concept of the utopian ideal of living an American dream either gets materialized or shattered. Now, beyond this set of themes that I just referred to, there is an increasing presence of another thematic trajectory, which I call contemporary themes or themes in contemporary literature, themes in contemporary Pakistani American literature. So they are like racism and Islamophobia. There is more sense of alienation and belonging. I didn't mention Homeboy, another work by Mohsin Naqvi, a different writer. He's very much concerned about the question of how diaspora might feel alienated in certain instances and how their sense of belonging might get challenged. And then globalization, Mohsin Hamis, the reluctant fundamentalist, delves deep into that. And then the concept of clash of civilizations, how does that play out, and how Pakistani diaspora pushes back against that in order to make America a comfortable place to live in. Attached with that is East versus West economic disparity, especially Mohsin Hamid's work are deeply invested in that concept. And then resilience and survival, how characters survive despite the possible cultural pressures that they receive. And then post 9/11 Muslim experience is a kind of, I would say, very Western phenomenon now. And then finally, how art and creativity, they serve as medium of healing or healing process. So the contemporary literature is more tied with these themes that I just referred to. Now, with this background in mind and this very sketchy introduction of some of the literary works, our foresight about the future of Pakistani American literature would probably be described in two ways. One is that Pakistani American literature has the potential, it already has the potential to become part of world literature. So when I say that, but I'm referring to the power dynamic. And what I'm suggesting is that when we envision a body of world literature, we might maybe nuance this phrase a little bit by rephrasing it as world Anglophone literature. So when we imagine that body, what I hope and what I suggest is this, that some of the Pakistani literary texts, Pakistani American literary texts, have the potential to become part of that broader body of world literature. So they have that representative potential to be counted as works which should be read and taught at various universities in the world. So that will happen. So there is a disciplinary pathway for that to happen, and that is through immigration and diaspora literature. So because world literature is about border crossing, it's about transnationalism, transculturalism, it's about the global world. Therefore, the kind of literature which can better address the question of border crossing, assimilation, humanism, that literature in all likelihood would be the literature of immigration and diaspora, because that is the literature which deals with these broader themes of transnationalism or globalism. So Pakistani American literature, I'm suggesting, because of its emphasis on immigration and diaspora issues, has the potential to become part of not only world literature, but broadly speaking, immigration and diaspora literature. So this is the end of the overview of some of the representative Pakistani American literature. I thank you for your attention, and I welcome all the questions.
Professor Azeem, for the overview and the presentation. I just wanted to briefly introduce myself again. I'm Imaan Mirza. I'm currently a rising senior at Harvard College, where I studied literature. And so everything that Professor Azeem was just talking about is very much my bread and butter. And I'm really, really excited to be talking about Pakistani American literature. I myself am an immigrant, originally from Pakistan, but grew up in Saudi Arabia. And so Pakistani American literature has always been a really useful way to help me define myself and the way I sort of see my identity in this broader kind of socio-political landscape. But with that, Professor Azeem, if it's okay, I can begin by asking some questions, and then I'd really encourage everyone in attendance today to feel very free to drop questions in the chat, DM me questions, and then alternatively raise your hand up using the Zoom function, and then you're very welcome to hop in and ask your question. So amazing. Okay, so Professor Azeem, I'd really love to step back and just ask you, broadly speaking, about your interest in literature. You know, I think everyone who studies literature, who loves literature, has a sort of like origin story when it comes to what resonates specifically about, you know, reading literature. And so would love to hear sort of your own perspective and thoughts about that specifically.
Well, my specific interest in South Asian American literature, I think, is rooted in many ways to try to navigate my own bicultural identity. So I think it is more through the exposure and the questions which I kind of came across, and the questions which were triggered in my mind when I got exposed to works like The Reluctant Fundamentalist or Homeboy, which is not mentioned over here. And I was really looking for answers to those questions. So what kind of engaged my interest throughout, and which continues to engage my interest in foreseeable future, is precisely the potential of a literary text to develop connections and to have empathy, and then to keep thinking about and, you know, engage in a kind of process of introspection, you know, self-reflection. I think that is the foundation of my interest, my, you know, continued interest in literary texts.
Really helpful. I think relatedly, I'm also curious about what you feel is unique about literature, specifically about the Pakistani diaspora, that is different from other kind of modes of artistic expression. So for instance, like thinking about like journalism or, you know, films, like what is it specifically about literature written by Pakistani American authors do you think is potent, that stands apart from other genres, and that I think appeals most to you?
So so there are two ways to address this. One, stylistically, works like Mohsin Hamid's Exit West or The Reluctant Fundamentalist, I think they are creative feats, if I put it that way. So there is a lot of uniqueness, and there is you know, experimentation in the very writing process. You know, in first case, the use of monologue in a manner where one is able to engage in a kind of conversation taking place between two people, one of them is quiet and the other one is speaking. I think that is almost incomparable experiment. And in the other case, the use of magical realism, for example, in Exit West, that stands out as one of the contemporary experimentations in fiction writing. So the other way to approach this is through the content. So Pakistani American literature, among the texts about diaspora and immigration literature from many other ethnic configurations, stands out for at least one reason, and that is, I would say, the embracing of the concept of faith. So I just use the word faith, but so I'm trying to include a number of possible faiths which could be pulled in a literary narrative. I think that is very challenging for the creative writer to do that in a manner where a literary work should have that human, holistic, and global appeal, but at the same time infuses in it various forms of violence, racialization, marginalization, which certain people are facing because they identify themselves as belonging to a certain faith. So that is significantly unique in Pakistani American literature. So if I recommend this body of literature to our colleagues or audience or general public, I would do that precisely on these foundations because that component of one's life, which we call faith, completes human self, right? At least for certain people or people from certain parts of the world. And these writers, many of them, Ayad Akhtar, Mohsin Hamid, they are not letting that go. They are making that part of the holistic identity of what we call Pakistani culture or Pakistani self. Yeah, so I hope I addressed it.
I think what you were saying initially about the experimentality in Mohsin Hamid's literature is that very much resonates with me. I recently read Exit West, and I was really astounded by like the surrealism and the way in which the city he writes about remains anonymous throughout the book. I thought that was just a really, really, really well done. I want to quickly pivot to a question we received from Farah. Hi, Farah. She's asking about how you believe Pakistan Anglophone lit may differ from Indian literature. I think it's a good question. I think among the first books that I read when I first moved to the country was like Jafar Lahiri's The Namesake, and that was one of the first books that I felt quite resonated with me and like my experiences in this country. So would love to hear your perspective there, Professor Azeem. You go ahead. I just want to like make a quick note to everyone who just joined the Zoom that you are very welcome to drop questions in the chat or DM them to me or raise your hand up and we'll get to them shortly. Thank you.
I think there are many overlaps. As I said at the start, the immediate context for Pakistani American literature is South Asian literature. And within that body, I think Indian American literature, it really stands tall, both in terms of size and experimentation and history. There is longer history over there because of the immigration policies in the United States. So I cannot really see very strong, or sharp distinguishing points between, I mean, that will be such a big generalization because many of the themes I see overlapped. I mean, even post 9/11 Muslim identity uh, is taken care of, uh, in some of the Indian diaspora's text too. So I really look at literature produced from Pakistani and Indian diaspora in the US as a collective body. I don't want to say similar. Of course, there are many differences. They are rooted in the respective histories and geographies and identities and concerns that these two diasporas have in the US. But still, I see more overlaps than differences. So I would like to kind of put them together as South Asian American literature. I think that kind of complements both bodies as kind of concerted voice to safeguard uh, South Asian identity in the United States.
Yeah, it's really, really thoughtful. If there are no other questions, I have another question, and it's something I think about a lot as a writer, especially someone who writes nonfiction, especially someone who writes about, my own life. I'm curious about how, if you have any takes or perspectives on how Pakistani American writers, or some of them do. So for instance, Ayad Akhtar did this with Homeland Elegies. They draw a lot from their own lives to help them sort of, convey important kind of themes or arguments. And, it's a genre that I think a lot of people are calling quote unquote autofiction. And so I've seen this like hyperfixation on trying to like pin it down. Ooh, is this like autobiographical? Is it not? And well, I'm first of all curious as to like if you have any, thoughts on why that exists. Like why are people so desperate to know if it is, factual? But then beyond that, what does that say? Like what does that mean? And does that sort of even matter? And I saw that you sort of shared biographical information about the authors and like their sort of immigrant kind of background, but I guess why is that important for us as readers to sort of know that information as we read these works of literature?
So, sorry. So I think so technically, the writer and the narrator are in many ways two independent identities, in the sense that the narrator doesn't have to be the writer or author themselves. So as a literary critic, as a student of literary criticism, I would be cautious in evaluating or analyzing a literary text as a body of literature, or as a piece of literature or piece of art, which has its own inclusive, enclosed existence, and then evaluate it as such. So probably I would be avoiding conflating the content of the literary text with the life of the author. I will do that because the author did not necessarily write their own life, but they did write the text that I'm reading, and they intended to do so. Okay, so but of course you have a counter argument, which is implied in your question, which is why did I introduce the author themselves, or why did I share the biography? So I would say that is for the sake of classification, right? So we need to have a history, literary history. Well, these are the people. So I mean, that was my intention, to have them, not to use their life to understand their text. I think that probably will be misleading in many instances.
I think it's actually one of the first like lessons we learn as like students of literature. It's that obviously naturally we have to separate the voices of the authors from the writers. And yeah, thank you for that perspective. And I think you're right. I think it's important to find some sort of way to, again, characterize this like body of literature, and this is like obviously one way to do it. I had another question. So I know you spoke a little bit about what you envision for the future of this genre of literature, this body of literature. But I would love to hear you speak more to that prognosis, and specifically about, I mean, if there's subjects that you sense like Pakistani American writers today, like gravitating toward any new subjects, or I guess another way of asking that question too is, are there any subjects that you wish Pakistani American writers would focus more on, would write about? Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think we already see a significant onward momentum in Pakistani American literary texts, which is to go beyond the a narrow Pakistani identity as the only instance of as the only instance of as the only instance which can be represented through a literary text written by a Pakistani American writer. So we see that there is an expansion where I mean, think of Mohsin Hamid's The Last White Man. So as an example of a text which is pushing against what I would call identity conflation or identity politics to some extent, or obsession with one particular identity. So going beyond that in a manner where that particular text is widening the scope of the problem of racism across the racial lines rather than the specific ethnic lines. So I would like to see more of this momentum to continue, where the literary texts are produced which are not necessarily about sense of victimhood in one particular diaspora or sense of achievement in one particular diaspora. Instead, which kind of expand the scope of what does it mean to have a just society? What does it mean to have freedom? What does it mean to have choices in your life? So on and so forth. Untied with the specific one particular ethnic identity. So we need to diverse that. We need to kind of separate to some extent. We need to separate these issues from one particular ethnicity and expand them to include other ethnic configurations as well, so that literary texts have more universal appeal.
I think on the note of universal appeal, I think we have two questions related to that, which I think I'll sort of combine into one. The first one was from Farah, and she was specifically asking about what needs to be happening for Pakistani American literature to be more mainstream in US college curricula. And then Imaan sort of followed up and shared that she actually read Mock Smoke by Mohsin Hamid in her AP literature class, which I assume was in high school, and that she's wondering about if literature like that is being seen in other places around the country, and as readers, how we can sort of go about uplifting the voices of other Pakistani Americans and writers.
Okay, I think I get, so the first question is about the potential future experiments that Pakistani American writers do in terms of becoming more mainstream, right?
Specifically asking, what needs to happen? I think,
okay,
interpret that broadly
for them to
for
become
it to be
mainstream.
More mainstream.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay, so I think it should work both way around. One is in terms of the creative experiment, to be more broader. So that could be, by broader, I mean to include the, historical narrative, which kind of engages with broader concerns. So that is from the creative writer side, and from the literary critics and audience and the readers, I think at least the Pakistani diaspora, they need to engage more with reading and promotion of the literary texts, because I think just from our interaction with some of the diaspora, in the United States, who are not necessarily literature students, we immediately start noticing that there is more need to promote literary texts written by Pakistani diaspora. I think if we kind of do whatever we can in our capacity in terms of promoting Pakistani literary texts and Pakistani American literature, to be specific, there will be more likelihood for them to at least become a little more popular, in the mainstream academy.
I think we're running up in time, but we do have a question from Zaid in the chat. And he shares that, he's new to this genre of Pakistani American literature and is looking for the first book recommendation from you. So if you had to recommend the first book for him to read, what would that be, Professor?
So if it is the first book, I would definitely say The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid. So it is short, it is terse, it is engrossing, it engages. So that will be my recommendation.
I think we should have time for one or two more questions if anyone has any in the audience. I'll take the opportunity to ask a question then. Let's see, I think I'd love to know actually if there are any like up and coming Pakistani American authors who you'd recommend as well. I mean, there's some big names like Mohsin Hamid, who I guess maybe more of us are familiar with, but if there's anyone else you've like discovered recently or you'd want to highlight now, I'd love to hear it. I think you're on mute right now. For me, I don't know if anyone. Okay, you're back.
Okay,
yes,
I got
lovely.
it. Sorry. Yeah. So mostly I talked about the literary writers, the novelists and the playwrights. But and so that, I mean, there is little bias over there as well, because those are my specialities. So but then also I kind of have an argument in favor of literary narrative as having more potential to uh, you know to influence the journalistic or the political narratives that kind of come to us from the positions of power. So that is my reason for preferring literary narratives. But then poetry, I think, is one potential. There is a lot of innovation and experimentation over there. So poets like Mitra Javed, Amara Chaudhry, I mean, these are two kind of budding names, and I think they are worth seeing and reading. Yeah, so Mohsin Hamid keeps, he's prolific, so more should be coming up. But then I think his latest novel is one good read if you haven't come across that. Then The Last White Man.
That I'm excited to pick that up at some point soon. I want to highlight this is Fakhra Jamil, and they have a question specifically about how you see post 9/11 interest in American Pakistani literature.
Can you repeat the question?
Was how you see post 9/11 interest in American Pakistani literature. So maybe I think maybe they're asking about the theme of 9/11 and how that manifests in literature, and your perspective there.
Right. So frankly, 9/11 has kind of worked as a catalyst, for the production of Pakistani American literature, in its dissemination, in its popularity, so on and so forth. And the reasons known to us all. Now, probably I can comment on its significance for our contemporary times. So I would say most of post 9/11 literature, or the literature about post 9/11, it helps us to understand a little better, some of the polarizations which happened in the United States in more recent times. That literature helps us to engage with some of the debates which are very important, which help us to understand American culture, especially the multi-ethnic culture, in a more sophisticated manner. There are many questions that we come across in post 9/11 texts, and those questions are useful because they help us think about the lives that we are living in the United States. So I would definitely recommend 9/11 texts or 9/11 novels as potential sites where many debates about those issues are happening, which are very close to American society. So like Islamophobia, racism, So I would say literary texts, they are the right place to start all those debates, because there is more holistic representation of Pakistani American lives in the literary texts. And that is what we do not find in some of the journalistic debates, which are more black and white and which are more one-sided.
Answer, and I think you're absolutely right. I sort of see these books as like sites of debate and contestation, and you kind of actually have the real estate to be, engaging and indulging those debates. And that, I have a lot of thoughts about specifically how these books can like problematize this immigrant narrative of like, generally speaking, you hear about how people are like fleeing or like trying to like, move to a different country for a better life, and obviously that's true, and it's a huge impetus for why people move. But I think what these books do, and the books you selected do a really good job of, is like really like complicating that and like, muddying the stakes of like that move and like what that means. And I think that's really, really awesome. And I want to thank you so much for speaking on that specifically. I have one more question to close it out before I hand it over to the better Imaan to hear. But I'm curious, and this is like a fun question, but out of the books you selected, I mean, do you have an obvious preference for one of them? And this is a separate question, but do you remember the first book you read by a Pakistani American author, and like, what stood out to you right away as you read it?
That was the reason I recommended that to, I think, Zad, the person who asked question, was that that was the book I read myself, and that was my first book that I read about Pakistani American experience. That was The Reluctant Fundamentalist. I think what stood out in that was the power of the text. I know there are many problems, in the narrative. There are there are ideological concerns. There are stylistic concerns as well. So everything is there. But what I liked about the book was its potential to trigger questions in my mind. the book engaged me in terms of asking questions and thinking about what happened and what happened after that unfortunate, incident in the United States. So the potential to, unleash the questions, I think that is at the heart of that book.
Love also the language of like unleashing questions. And I think that's a sign of good literature if you're sort of left wanting more, but also asking more questions as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Professor Azeem, for sharing.
Thank you, Professor Azeem. Thank you, Imaan. And nice joke from earlier, but thank you both very much. We appreciated it. Everyone who is on here, wonderful questions, and yet another great day of Heritage Week in the wraps. If you want to go back or check out some of our other videos from this past Heritage Week, we are uploading them to YouTube. But big round of applause, virtually, I guess, to Imaan and Professor Azeem for a really an enlightening conversation. It was truly awesome, and yes, I did read Moss Milk in my AP Literature class, and when we went to go read it in my high school class, I had no idea what it was about. In the first chapter, I read through it, and I went to my teacher. I was like, "Is this about a Pakistani? I'm Pakistani." I was so excited. And it was a great book. In fact, I gave it to my mom to read as well. So that's also a great book to check out. Um, although I don't have the experience Professor Azeem has, I found it interesting as a high school senior. So I think that says a lot. Beyond that, thank you all very much. And have a great Independence Day. Professor Azeem and Imaan, if you want to stick on for a second, so we could get a nice little Zoom screenshot of us smiling, that'd be great. But thank you, everyone else. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. Thank you both so much. This was wonderful. I
Yeah,
forgot
thank you. You kind of
beginning.
put it together in a very nice manner. You kind of, knitted it together, which is great.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you both. Normally in the beginning, I asked to take a screenshot of, the two people smiling together, but we started admitting people so fast, I kind of forgot. So I'll turn off my camera and I'll get a picture of you guys smiling. Okay. Wonderful. I got it. And again, sorry if I sound congested. My body chose the best week for me to get sick.
No, not at all. I think you sounded just perfect.
Thanks.
You just told it. Otherwise, I couldn't suspect anything
Oh,
wrong
awesome.
with your voice. Yeah.
I just want to let you know we'll post it on YouTube in the next few days, and we'll send the link in the group chat, and you can share it with different colleagues and peers and whatnot. But again, thank you so much. I'm very
Thank
appreciative.
you. Thank you. This is all yours and Iman's effort,
Oh, it's
Imaan
mainly
Mirza's effort.
Iman's.
Yeah, the both of you made it possible. And then Henry, of course, he's very generous,
He's
yeah.
great.
So yeah, true.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I guess I
Yeah.
could